Hi everyone, I'm Scott Bevins, integrative fitness coach and trainer, and today I'm here to talk to you about heartburn. Now, most of us are familiar with spicy foods and how that can bring on the feeling of heartburn, but today we're going to look at something a little different. We're going to look at eating behaviors and how we can ameliorate heartburn or drastically reduce heartburn by addressing 3 specific behaviors. And in the end, we are going to look at a few substances that weaken the lower esophageal sphincter. And that sphincter is actually a muscle that resides in between the stomach and the esophagus. And when that sphincter is weak, that is what allows the acid from the stomach to flush up into the esophagus, which is an alkaline environment. And that's what creates that pain and discomfort. So we're going to discuss 3 different eating behaviors that can greatly impact heartburn, and that is eating speed, overeating, and drinking fluids with your meals. So let's jump into this. So the first thing is eating speed. Now, when we eat too fast, we really do ourselves a disservice from the perspective of digestion. When we eat too fast, whole food particles end up in our stomach, and it requires a lot more work for our stomach to actually break down that food. Now, our stomach is responsible for chemical digestion, primarily through hydrochloric acid. Our teeth are responsible for mechanical breakdown of food. So ideally, we're supposed to chew our food until it's liquid. And that's what I tell all of my clients who have heartburn, is to make sure they're thoroughly chewing their food so they can properly break it down mechanically in their mouth first. And then that way, when the food gets to the stomach, they are relatively broken down substances that the hydrochloric acid can then go to work on. Now, the stomach can break down food mechanically, but it doesn't do it very well. There are 3 muscles that surround the stomach. And if we do have whole food particles coming in, it can kind of massage and squeeze and flex these muscles. But the problem is that the muscles around the stomach are not conditioned for mechanically breaking down food. And therefore, just like any muscle that works more than what it's conditioned for, it can start to cramp. So that is a reason why we can get stomach aches as well, is if we're eating too fast and then our stomach muscles have to overwork in order to try to do the work that our mouth was supposed to do. And incidentally, this is another reason why people can get bloat and experience fatigue following meals, is because it takes a lot of energy in order to mechanically break down that food. And it also can be very aggravating to the gut, which can create the bloat. So the next thing is overeating. And this tends to go hand in hand with eating too fast, because frequently when we eat too fast, we'll tend to overeat because it takes a while for the signals to reach our brain that we're actually full and satiated. If you are overeating, that is another potential reason why you could be experiencing your heartburn. And so the reason we can get heartburn from overeating is because if we're eating enough food that's going to fill our stomach completely, we're going to be putting pressure on that valve that separates the stomach from the esophagus. And that's called the lower esophageal sphincter, also known as the cardiac sphincter. So putting pressure up on that muscle that separates those 2 areas of the body can start to aggravate it and weaken it. And then it's when we weaken that muscle that acid can start to flush through into the alkaline environment in the esophagus. Another thing to consider is that you can only produce so much hydrochloric acid in one sitting. Not everybody can produce enough acid to accommodate a stomach that's full of food. Some of us can only produce enough acid to accommodate stomach content that's about half to 3/4 full. So it's important to listen to your body's feedback. When you start eating less and when you start slowing down your eating pace, your body will start to tell you. Your heartburn will either improve or it won't, and that'll give you some signals as to whether or not you're on the right track. So the last eating behavior I want to discuss for today is drinking fluids with your meals. Now, I know most of you probably do this. However, if you have heartburn, I'm going to strongly recommend avoiding fluids with your meals for at least the next week or 2, and then try it and see how it works. Now, a couple of things happen when you drink fluids with your meals. One, you do weaken your digestion. And the reason that is because anytime you dilute an acid, such as hydrochloric acid, you weaken it, and therefore digestion is hampered. Another thing to consider when you're drinking with your meals is it's probably creating a situation where you're eating too fast. And this isn't always the case, but take a look at it for yourself. Now, when we're drinking fluids with our meals, we can easily just wash down partially chewed food where if we're just going to swallow partially chewed food without liquid, it makes it a bit more difficult. So you may find that by avoiding fluids with your meals, that allows you to also slow down your eating speed, which when we slow down our eating speed, that allows us to eat a little bit less. So you can see how all of this kind of goes together. There is one thing I want to add about fluids with meals. Sometimes you can drink acidic fluids with your meals, and that can actually aid digestion. So things like wine, lemon water, apple cider vinegar. Now I know lemon water and apple cider vinegar are not normal things that people drink with their meals. However, I have had some clients use apple cider vinegar and lemon water. It's like a little bit of lemon water before a meal, like immediately before a meal, to actually aid their digestion. So that is another option that you can try. Now, if that makes your heartburn worse, don't do it anymore. So a lot of people, for some reason, they have heartburn when their acid is too low. So by supporting their digestive system with acidic fluids during their meals, that can actually aid digestion and, oddly enough, decrease their heartburn. So again, you just have to try and see what works for you. So we just discussed 3 different things that you can do to help your heartburn, and that's overeating, eating too fast, and drinking fluids with your meals. Now let's take a look at a few substances that can weaken that sphincter muscle that we were talking about earlier. Now I mentioned earlier on about spicy foods, which is the obvious one, but another one that's not quite as obvious are carbohydrates, so foods that are high in sugars or even starchy carbs. It doesn't matter, any sugar, any carb. Sometimes people are sensitive to the carbohydrates that they're taking in, and therefore need to just eat less. So if your diet is fairly high in carbohydrate, or even if it's just moderate in carbohydrate, try pulling back on that, and that may make a difference. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there's 3 other substances I have to mention that can weaken that esophageal sphincter, and that is coffee, alcohol, and marijuana. Now, it doesn't do it in everyone, but if you have heartburn, these are 3 substances to take a look at and experiment with getting rid of them or drastically reducing the amount that you're taking in of each of those. One more thing I want to say about aggravating foods. So whether that's carbohydrate foods, dairy foods, because in some people dairy does aggravate heartburn within them, or spicy foods. But what I'd like to suggest is before you actually get rid of that aggravating food, try changing your eating behaviors first. You may find if you're chewing that food very thoroughly and you're not drinking any liquids with your meals, you may find you can, lo and behold, now tolerate that food. So it may have never been a problem with the food itself. It may be the eating behavior. Sometimes it's a combination of both things. And before we wrap up, I'm asking you to embody and listen to your body. That's the only way you're really going to determine how these foods or eating behaviors that you're changing up are going to make a difference. If your life is too hectic and too stressed, then you may not hear the subtle clues that your body is giving you. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments and I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.